Hello chess friends and welcome to Zarov's chess channel and welcome to the Computer Blitz Chess Championship in 2020 today with another great gameplay by Stockfish NNUE against Stockfish Classical version. I have to say also a little bit I am a little bit disappointed by the continuation now of the Computer Blitz Chess Championship, because now in the last 100 or even more rounds, many Van Kruijs and Mises openings have been played. It's not the problem that these openings are played, it's a problem about the setup. The setup is bad for more particular side, so they're playing basically the dubious lines and they're playing now it over 200 rounds. I think it's a little bit annoying these two openings to see all the time. I would really love to see some more normal openings, for instance, like the Queen's Gambit Decline, Rui Lopez Italian game, maybe some French Sicilian setups and similar ideas that we're trying to improve. As I said, I'm a little bit disappointed, but still, of course, it's a great tournament. But as I said, these openings that they choose, they're really bad. I will show you the link to the tournament in the description below, so you can maybe check it out for yourself. I'm not really satisfied now by the last 100 games. So let's check out now the game between Stockfish and Stockfish NNUE. It was in a French defense, which I think still is a good opening for both sides. Of course, it's playable for black and for white, and as usual in this top engine games, we say round one and we have this immortal Mortal Kombat sound fight. So e4 play by Stockfish NNUE. Stockfish Classic plays e6, the French d4, d5, knight to c3, and we have now knight to f6, the Steinitz variation of the French. We have e5, which is the best way to attack the knight now, knight to d7, and we can already talk so many things about this particular position. What we have now is a blocked pawn structure in the center, so it means this d4 e5 setup, and here e6 d5 setup by black. We have now the directed attack. So of course, white needs to get an attack here on the king side with f4 f5 g4 ideas and similar stuff. On the other hand, black has to attack the queen side because the pawns are showing us the direction. We should attack c5 b5 and similar ideas if the position allows it. So here f4 immediately by Stockfish and NNUE, c5, knight to f3, knight to c6, still normal theory of the Steinitz variation, and now bishop to e3. Now comes queen to b6, attacking the weak b2 pawn, forces really to make something here, and now knight to f4 is still the main line of the Steinitz. We have queen to a5, the check, and now c3. Now comes, I think, really the first sort of inaccuracy by Stockfish. This was still prearranged, so that's why probably this mistake is played in order to get some kind of an activity here for both sides, because as I said, many openings are prearranged and they're maybe not so good. A better idea is maybe here to take c takes d4 immediately. After something like b4, we can play knight to b4. It's a very aggressive line with a very annoying knight sacrifice. So, but even if you try here, queen to c7, we can take knight to d4, knight takes d4, and bishop to d4. And what the point about this particular setup is, I think that white has some troubles, of course, still on the queen side. We have here a weak backward pawn on c3, although the pawn is so far protected, but at least I think this particular line gives black some kind of an opportunity to maybe have a flexibility on the queen side and break the position somehow on the queen side. So far it's not possible. Of course, we have to play bishop to e7, secure the king, but I think we could make progress on the queen side. But after the move, let's go back here. After the move c4, now of course Stockfish NNUE has a great liberating line. It's the move b4, and we're attacking now the queen. If you try en passant c takes b3, after a takes b3, I think again white has solved all of the positional problems. Now we have again firm pawn structure on the queen side, and we have now an advanced pawn here on e5. Still we can make progress here with g4 f5 ideas, and I think this is playable now for white. It's much better here for white to play this position. So after move b4, so en passant is not an option here. Queen to c7, bishop to e2, and now b5. But now again we can solve sort of our positional problems on the queen side. We can play knight to c5, we have a5, and now a3. Knight takes c5, we have d takes c5. This position has been played many times in chess history. What we can notice, of course, that white has slightly disadvantage in space. We have now really a dominant position on the 5th rank. We have two advanced pawns. Black is also one advanced pawn here on the 4th rank. So still, black has some kind of an activity here. At least maybe we can open the A file, but still, I think the main idea is to create sort of a blockade here, to create a compact position around the square d4. We should never allow black to make progress with move d4 himself, so that's why it's necessary to create some kind of a blocking system around the square. So far, this square is perfectly fine. So in the game g6, we have castling, bishop to e7. What we can also notice is now that basically these two bishops are bad on the board, because you see we have many pawns on dark squares. So that's why this bishop on e3 is a bad bishop. On the other hand, from black's perspective, many pawns are on light squares. You see we have here sort of light square pawn chain, so that's why the bishop on d7 is also a bad bishop. So what we would love to do is, of course, from white perspective, to trade off this bishop for this bishop on f8, and from black's perspective, we would love to give up somehow this bad bishop for this good bishop, because at least this bishop has some kind of an activity here towards the king side. So queen to d2, bishop to a7, rook to c1, rook to a6, and now rook to c2. This is a very important move. It's of course sort of a stockfish move. I'm not sure how many humans would play now the move rook to c2, but what we can notice is that we could lose the battle on the a file. So the rook will finally come to a8, and then after something like 8 takes b4 and maybe 8 takes b4, this rooks could be very, very active on the second rank. So that's why it's a prophylactic idea here by Stockfish NNUE. And still, we can maybe even remaneuver our rook here to f2. This is really, as I said, a top engine move. Rook to f2, and now getting also a very nice rook battery on the f file. So very nice rook lift here by Stockfish NNUE. Here castling play by Stockfish Classic, and now knight to d4. We have knight takes d4. We have bishop to d4. Of course, you don't want to take immediately c takes d4, because you're further blocking out your dark square bishop, and now suddenly black has a pass pawn situation. That's always something that you should take care of. Never allow your opponent to create a pass pawn, because when we what we can notice that white has at least one pass pawn. Here it's the pass pawn on c5. So this pass pawn will also play a very important role now in the continuation of the game. So that's why knight bishop to d4, not c takes d4, rook to a8. Now comes this idea, and now bishop to f3. You see now how this bishop has at least some kind of an activity. At least it's attacking something. On the other hand, this bishop on d7 is really, really bad here by black. So queen to d8, queen to e1, we have h5, and now rook to e2, creating again a very nice and firm compact position here around the king. 8 takes b4, we have 8 takes b4. This bishop is of course part of the pawn chain, but at least it protects here this backward pawn on c3. This is now our main weakness, the pawn here. So that's something that black should probably attack, but you have problems. You cannot activate all of the pieces. So here bishop to c6, played by Stockfish Classical. Now f5, really a monster move here by Stockfish NNUE. Of course, you cannot take g takes f5. Will simply play bishop to h5, and the king is now suddenly naked. It doesn't have a good protection, so that's why e takes f5 has to be played. But now e6, breaking the position here in front of the king. Very nice pawn sacrifice. Now I hope you see. Again, this dark square bishop is now perfectly fine. This bishop is also getting very active into the game, as we can target now the d5 weakness. This d5 is also sort of weakness. The bishop has always to protect the d5 pawn. In the game, bishop to f6 was played. If you try f6 now, then queen to g3 is a very nasty idea. Here you have some troubles. If you try king to h7, then queen to f4 can be played. If you try, for instance, to trade off the queens, then you get a nice tactical shot. Bishop to h5. Okay, you can maybe trade off, you can maybe even create a check, but the problem is now after g takes h5, we have queen to f5, now queen to g6. Here in this particular position, if you try here to escape, king to g7, then we have queen to g5. You cannot again take, again you lose the pawn with the check. So that's why maybe you're forced here to play king to g8, but now queen to g6, and after king to h8 we can take another pawn, and here it's even a forced checkmate, because after king to g7 we'll have rook to e3 and rook to g3. Here a very nice rook diff. You cannot prevent that. So in the game, let's go back. After the move e6, you see f6 doesn't bring you so much, as you're weakening the pawn structure a little bit further. So that's why here bishop to f6, black is trying to trade off now the bishops. We have e7, we have bishop to d4 with a check, c takes d4, or the forced line, and now queen to e8. This is now a very, very nasty pass pawn. You see, supported by the rook and queen battery here on the e file. What we can again notice that, again, simply this bishop on c6, it's part of the pawn chain. That's what I was talking about in the beginning. We should find a way how to trade off our dark square bishop here from white's perspective for black's dark square bishop. So now you see we have many pawns on dark squares, but we have the light square bishop. We can really get some kind of an activity. And again, I think you realize here that again, always this bishop to h5 as a tactical shot could be very risky, because then after g takes h5 we can split the pawns, getting this rook very active, because this bishop is simply like a pawn. It's not even worth, I think, that we call it a bishop here on c6. So here queen to g3, threatening of course bishop to h5 idea. So that's why here rook to a7, we want at least to grab this pawn now. When we get this pawn, even if white tries now bishop to h5, we can at least take this one, and after something like maybe rook to e7, queen to e7, bishop to g6, okay, maybe, but now I think we can protect this. The rook is protecting the bishop. So far this bishop to h5, rook, bishop sacrifice doesn't work here, so that's why rook to e1, first protecting our very important pawn. We have c3 here, very important move, which of course deflects a little bit white's pieces from the defense. But here if you try something like rook to a1, maybe rook to a1, king to f2 can be played, and again we have here maybe a tactical shot, so that's why king to g7 wouldn't be a possibility. After bishop to g7 you get queen to e5 and you lose decisive material, so that's why maybe you would be forced to play something like king to h7. But now queen to d6, very, very tricky. After something like c3, if you push the pawn now, again bishop to d5, and it's a bad game. Even if you don't play, maybe something like if you try to get your rook back here maybe to a7, then again I think we can protect everything, and again maybe try this idea bishop to h5 followed with queen to f5 is a nice tactical shot. You see, we have sneaked in with our queen into dark squares here. We don't have the king doesn't have any more the protection, so again I think this is much better for white. So you see, you have troubles to simplify the position here by trading off the rooks on the e file. So that's why c3 was played, at least trying to deflect, as I said, some pieces from the attack. Here queen to e5, we have rook to a1, rook to a1, rook to a1, king to f2, again a similar position appears here, and now f4, which isn't maybe the best of moves, maybe trying to get our rook back somehow, because the bishop is of course attacking this. F4 is creating, of course, at least some kind of an idea that the queen gets deflected again from the defense of this pawn. But now here h4, played by Stockfish NNUE, we have king to h7, and now again this tactical shot. Now it's probably working, because after bishop to d7, if you try again g takes h5, queen to h5, we have king to g7, now queen to g5. Again, maybe some perpetuals, but now what we can notice here, after queen to g4, king to h7, now rook to queen to f4. Pardon me, that wouldn't be the line. I think here simple rook to e5 is winning. If you try f6, we can play rook to h5. You have to give up the queen here. And after queen to h5, again we can promote. You have to give up your bishop, then we can catch up with this pawn. Still we have here a pass pawn on the c file. Again, it's a bad game here for black. So that's why bishop to d7, you cannot really take this bishop. As I said, we waited this tactic to work, this tactical shot with bishop to h5. Now it's working, we get our pawn back at least. Here in the game, bishop to f3, again attacking the weakness. We have bishop to f5, rook to e1, we have king to rook to a2, king to g1, and now c2. So okay, what to do now here? Again, what we can see that white is black is also this very advanced pawn on c2. In the game, bishop to d5, finally getting this bishop very active into the game. But now rook to a7, protecting everything, at least trying this blockade. But you see how many moves this queen was stuck here on e8. Really incredible attack by Stockfish and NNUE. In the game, queen to f6 was played. Now we have pardon me, f3. If you try, for instance, to get your promotion here to c1 to deflect this rook, then we can take after rook to e7. We can play simply a normal and calm move, king to h2. And again, I think you have some troubles because now suddenly we have now this pass pawn in the game. After the move queen to f6 here, f3 was played. What the idea about this move is, if we deflect here with the move c1, if we deflect here the rook and then we can take, then the problem is now that the king is a little bit naked here because we have weakened the pawn structure in front of the king. In the previous line we could see that the king could escape here to maybe to h2 and play this calm move. Now with the f3 we're trying at least to mess up white's pawn structure here, but now Stockfish NNUE simply takes now this pawn. We have rook to e7 and pause the video and now find now the best next move. As usual in this games we say, so test your might in chess, try to see now the best continuation. Okay, the correct move is now here the move bishop takes g6. What we have here really is a nice tactical shot. Many pieces are overloaded. If you try, for instance, bishop takes g6, then of course we'll simply take. Rook takes e7, you have to move the king somewhere. You're getting checkmated if you get the king on h6, so you have to move it here maybe to g8, but first we'll take with check, and I think we can catch up with this pawn. It's not a problem. So that's why you have to take here after the move bishop to g6. Here king to g8 was played, but now you see after the move bishop takes e8, we have rook to e1, king to h2, and now rook to e8 again. If you try the promotion here to c1, it's not a possibility because you get checkmated. Queen to f7 is here the possibility. Again, you cannot do that. King to h8, we have queen to f8. Now we can take with the check, that's the most important thing. But again, queen to f7, and now you're getting a very nice checkmate here. The discovered attack, you have to move up to your king to h5, and then pardon me, not to g5 here. You can maybe try here g4. I think it's a very cool checkmate. So let's go back. So after the move king to h2, here king to h2, you have to take the bishop here, but now we get queen to g5, king to h8, again a check, and now we can take the rook. But now suddenly black is the one that is promoting to queen, and let's stop now and evaluate this endgame. Black has a bishop, white has, let me see, if we take out this pawn, has 4 extra pawns for the bishop, but still the king is naked here. The white king is naked, so you have to be careful in the game. Queen to e5, first the check, king to g6, and now we can grab this pawn. Here, queen to f1, queen to e8, we have some checks, and now we can play queen to g5 and trying to force trades of queens. If you try the trades of queens, then after king to g2, the problem is now this king is marching towards the center and the bishop has to move somewhere. If you try bishop to d7, then we'll simply move h6, h5. Everything is perfectly fine. You cannot go after both pawns because we'll simply push this pawn. If you take, you see we get this pawn on light square, you cannot catch up. So that's why it's a very risky choice here to trade off the queens. You cannot do that. That's why in the game queen to b1 was played. But now again some checks here by white, and now after queen to c7, queen to f4, we can push now this pawn. This is a very important move, c6, deflecting all of the pieces, and now queen to g5 again. And now after queen to b5, you see we have really now 5 pawns on the board. You can maybe try some checks here. Stockfish tried queen to b1 again, but again some checks, and now we're moving. Simply we're trying to move the king towards the center because we don't want to be vulnerable to our opponent's attacks. We have queen to g1, king to e5, here f4, very cool move, king to d6. Now we're getting this king to the other side. Okay, you can maybe try another check, but now no checks are possible. And now again, you see, you cannot do this one, king to e7, then you get queen to c7, forcing the trades of queens. So that's why Stockfish has to stay with the queens on the board. Here, queen to c7. Now we're pushing out simply this pawn, d5, here, d6. This is really a bad game. Now simply d7. queen to e8, again forcing the trades of queens, and now after queen to d8, this was game over. Maybe queen to a7, but again, no checks are possible. You see, you cannot create a check on d4, so it's losing here in the game. Queen to e5. Now we can grab this one. Again, you can try some checks, but everything is protected, and this was game over. So, okay, this was a long endgame. Now we're in move, let me see, 95. This wasn't, I think, the most important stage of this game. This middle game, this bishop sacrifice on h5, this tactics around the square f7, I think were really great. Great game in the Steinitz defense, in the Steinitz variation of the French defense. You see how this tactics can be really so messed up when you have sort of cramped position with your bishops. Incredible attack by Stockfish NNUE, and as I said, Stockfish NNUE is in the lead of the Computer Blitz Chess Championship now with a 10-point lead in front of the second, who is of course Lila C0. So, okay, I hope that you enjoy this game. I will add this game to my French defense series. If you have followed more my YouTube chess channel, I have created this French defense series in which I show you all of the possible lines that can happen to you in this very nice opening. So you can maybe add this one in order to have a good preparation as white, but also as black, because you see now these are Stockfish and NNUE games. We cannot really play like this, but at least maybe you can prepare some lines, and you may have, maybe you can surprise your opponent with some great tactics. So, okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. Meanwhile, you can watch my other analyzed games by Top Engines. Here's the series, here's the link. And if you liked the content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.